Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NFL edition. Last game of Super Wildcard Weekend is the Rams against the Vikings. Technically, the Rams are hosting the Vikings, but the game got moved to Arizona because of the LA fires. So super unfortunate for a lot of reasons, but obviously for the Rams here, it's a bummer that they have a home game and it's not even at home. So we're going to break down this slate. It is a showdown slate, super volatile. You can do a lot of different things. You honestly can do whatever you want. I'm just going to walk through it and point to my favorite plays, break it down a little bit, and kind of let you know what I want to do for this slate, my general strategy. If it helps you out in any way, please hit that like button, drive it up as many likes as we can get. Also, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. We have seen in the analytics on YouTube that we get a lot of returning visitors, but a lot of you are not subscribing. So if you are one of those people, just hit the subscribe button and even consider joining us in the Discord. We have our Discord link on our YouTube page. So be sure to do that, get involved with the community. And if you're feeling extra thankful, if any of my advice helps you win money, you can hit the super thanks tab below the video and give something back if you'd like to. All right, let's get into it. The way I like to go over showdown slates is look at the captain ownership first, and then kind of look at who's getting the most ownership, who projects the best, and how can we get different. So certainly, I'm sure if you play Showdown, you don't have to get different at captain, but you do have to get different in some manner if you want to avoid duplication and you want to separate yourself from the field. So obviously, it's not the worst thing in the world to finish first and be duped with a bunch of lineups if you're playing something like the Millie Maker, because you'll still win thousands and thousands of dollars. And maybe you won't be duped with that many people. I mean, it's not the worst thing if you win a GPP and you're duped with 1 to 5 people. It's not too bad. But if you can, without forcing it, if you can differentiate and make your lineup a little bit different and even better overall, then that is something we want to do. All right, first things first, Puka Nacua comes in with the best projection of the slate. Not so shocking because the Minnesota Vikings rank dead last against fantasy wide receivers on the year. So in general, this is a pass funnel defense. They are fairly stingy against the run. So naturally, the best, most logical way to attack them with the Rams is going to be with Nacua, with Kupp, maybe some of their other fringe guys like their backup wide receivers, their tight ends, and of course, Matthew Stafford. Does not mean we cannot play Kyren Williams, but as I was kind of alluding to on the main slate, when he was kind of chalky, I didn't really like him because Minnesota has a good run defense. They have only given up 11 rushing scores on the entire season, and they're a top 10 unit against fantasy running backs in general. So the upside is Kyren Williams, as he does score a lot of touchdowns because he's used it there in the goal line, and he has a good role overall, so he's going to be pretty involved. Plus, Blake Corum is out for the season with a broken arm. So, in theory, Kyren would still factor in. I'll get to him in a little bit, but first let's start with Puka. No problem eating the chalk there. If you want to eat the chalk with Puka Nacua, you're not getting different at captain. He's going to be 20 or more % owned. So there's that, but he's got the best projection, arguably the best ceiling of the slate. He's either at number 1 or Justin Jefferson is there. Either way, they both look really good. And Puka's a little bit cheaper than Jefferson and the captain too. So if you want to do that, I have no issue with that. Like usual, I'm just going to try to get a little bit different. If in the lineups I have Puka, I'm going to have to work harder to get different in the flex. But the thing is, if you hit your captain option and it's not a chalky guy, you don't have to try that much harder in the flex because you already got a lot different. Obviously, there is the possibility a chalky captain gets hurt. There's a possibility they just underperform. And there's just a possibility that another guy just is a little bit better. So this game does project as a shootout. It has a 47.5 total. Neither pass defense is very scary. The Vikings pass defense in particular is not scary. So that's how I'm attacking this game. So if you want to go with Puka here, I don't have an issue with that. I'm probably going to do something a little bit different. On the other side, you have Jefferson, second best projection of the entire slate, second most ownership. I think going with Jefferson, since he's a little bit more expensive and doesn't have as good of a projection, right away, that's going to get you a little bit different if you want to pivot off of Puka and go with Jefferson. Obviously, pairing the two would be something we should have interest in just because that means, we're right away, we have 2 slots dedicated to very, very safe and high upside plays. The only issue there is, it's going to be tough because then your flex options are going to be stretching yourself really thin and kind of captaining one of those guys and then also getting them in the flex. It's doable, but it might not be as palatable. So that might be a good reason for trying to see if we can get different in the captain and also save some cash in the process. But as far as like getting guys who actually have a good floor and a good ceiling, obviously that's something we want to do too if we can swing it. So Puka and Jettas, they look awesome. If you want to captain them and eat the chalk, no problem. I personally will probably slide them into the flex a good amount of the time. Coming in with the third best projection and the third most ownership is Sam Darnold. Obviously, Sam Darnold on the year has been really, really good. Let me just pull it up. I can't believe I went to DraftKings, but I did not pull up the lineup that I was going to be breaking down here. So bear with me for just a second. I know for a fact. Okay, first of all, as I look for this, let's just talk about the fact that Sam Darnold was absolute cheeks in the Week 18 finale against the Detroit Lions. So no doubt about it, he was not good. That might deter people a little bit from captaining him and like going after him in general, because obviously since he was a bust before coming to Minnesota, some people might think he's just kind of unraveling all of a sudden. While that is certainly possible, I don't really think that's going to be the case. I think he's going to show up. I think he's going to show out, and I think he's going to be solid. So whether or not you have to captain him is certainly open for debate, but he's been good overall. Down the stretch here in the last 5 games, 22 plus fantasy points in 3 of those 5 games. He had a 37-point outing against the Falcons 5 weeks ago, 28 fantasy points against Green Bay week 17. So he's been really good. In this exact matchup against the Rams back in week 8, he was okay, 18 fantasy points. I would expect something similar. They lost 30-20, one of their few losses on the year. So it's just nice the fact that he knows this defense now. He's seen them, I think, with his weapons and with his ability and who he's been all year. I think probably 18-25 is somewhere about where we can look for him. More realistically, as far as like a conservative projection, 18-22 makes a lot of sense. But I think he's a decent bet to approach 20 fantasy points and be a cornerstone of winning lineups, most likely. I don't think you have to put him in the captain, though. But if you don't want a captain or play Jefferson, Darnold is not a bad play there at all. Certainly, you could stack him with Jefferson. With Jefferson in the flex, saves you a little bit of cash because Darnold is $2,000 cheaper. So that could be one way we start to do that: save a little bit of cash, but still get a really good floor and decent ceiling option in the captain. But then there's also the fact that you can just get Darnold and just be like, oh, well, if he's going to spread the ball around, I get Darnold, and then I can go find the other guys he's going to go to, which obviously can be a number of guys. All right, so as we go here, Kyren Williams comes in 4th. This is a guy that I am pretty happy to fade like across the board. I don't mind putting him in the flex play because obviously you're saving a little bit of cash there as opposed to captaining him. I just don't really want to invest almost $16,000 in a guy that has pretty brutal matchup by the numbers. Worth noting, let's see, how did he do against them last time? He did have 22 fantasy points against them last time. He caught a receiving touchdown, and he had 97 yards on 23 carries. The problem is it's not a good matchup, and the Rams are not favored to win this game, and also he's just not an efficient runner. He will get there if he scores 100%. So if you want to trust in Kyren getting in the end zone, then he's more than viable. I think I just prefer him in the flex play. I'll note, though, that the where the ownership is does make him a little bit more compelling than I thought I was going to feel about him going in. But if he's the 4th most owned guy based off of his actual projection and his ceiling and what he's done all year and last year, he's technically coming in a little bit low owned. You certainly could argue that going way overweight on Kyren is a way to go and would get you different in tournaments. And certainly he's the floor ceiling guy that we like to go for. I just hate this matchup. And in the playoffs, everything gets elevated. So if the Vikings have a really stingy run defense, and it's not really a good matchup on paper, and he's not a very explosive and efficient runner in the first place, right away, my brain tells me that is a way that we can get different and go away from Kyren. So certainly dangerous. It's a dicey move for sure. It's a dicey strategy. And I definitely would still get exposure to him in general, particularly in the flex. But I think going away from him in captain makes a lot of sense since he still is carrying ownership and is in the top 5 in ownership right now. While I'm fine with like Puka and Jefferson and Darnold, one of my favorite plays, and actually now the more I think about it, my favorite play in the captain is going to be 8.4K TJ Hawkinson. TJ Hawkinson looks really, really appealing here. One of the big reasons why is the Rams are 2nd worst against tight ends on the year. So the matchup looks really, really good for him. Let me find his price here for a second. Let's see his game logs. He did not play the Rams the first time, so we really don't know what to expect from him in terms of the matchup, but the matchup looks great. No doubt about it, he's been very inconsistent. These are his last 5 games: 2.9, 11.8, 4.7, 10.2, 8.5. So I'm trusting in Hawkinson for a few reasons. Number one, because I do think the Vikings are going to win this game. I do think Sam Darnold's going to have success here. Number two, he's got one of the best matchups on the board. Obviously, the wide receivers have a great matchup, but the Rams are, equal opportunity stat sacks against tight ends too. If that matchup is going to hold true, and the Rams probably are going to try to do all they can to keep the ball out of Justin Jefferson's hands, I got to think that Hockenson has some success here. Now, the good news is he's been plenty involved. He's had 5+ targets in each of his last 5 games. He has 8 targets in the Lions game. So I'm pretty confident that the roles can be good and that he can turn that into some production with the PPR value at DK. And if he scores a touchdown, boy, oh boy, is he going to be a monster captain play at that price at, relatively low ownership, especially compared to the other guys. I mean, only 7 to 8% here. That is enough of a difference in the captain to get me excited. So Hockenson looks really, really good. I like him quite a bit for tournaments. Moving down, we have Aaron Jones coming in at a little bit less ownership. Aaron Jones is always live to just pop off and completely nuke a slate. So I definitely don't want to leave Aaron Jones out of my pool. The Rams are a better matchup on the ground for Minnesota than the Vikings are for, Kyren. So I think Aaron Jones is a little bit more interesting than Kyren. Plus he's way cheaper. It's just a very versatile player in general too. Aaron Jones has been rock solid. Not much bad to say about Aaron Jones. He hasn't been like elite, but he's had 11+ fantasy points in each of his last 7 games. About 11. He had 10.8 fantasy points back in week 12. So not a massive ceiling here. So it doesn't really feel like the best captain play. But I think he's still viable there just because he's going to go overlooked, obviously. So Aaron Jones is still a focal point of Minnesota's offensive attack. And if the Rams are going to do all they can to slow down Justin Jefferson, I think we certainly should be overweight on Aaron Jones in the captain. But when you factor in price, I still like Hockenson a little bit better than him. The other guy that I'm pretty excited to play here and go overweight on the captain is going to be Jordan Addison. Obviously, the Rams are really bad against wide receivers on the year. I already said that. So Jordan Addison obviously has the chance to benefit immensely from that. He did not benefit last time when he faced the Rams, only 4.2 fantasy points. But this guy has displayed a massive ceiling at times. Back in week 4, 22.9 fantasy points. Week 12, 33 fantasy points. And in week 14, 42 fantasy points. He was a no-show, just like all the other Vikings were in week 18. But before that, he had 13+ fantasy points in his 4 previous games. So Addison's quite involved. He's really not that expensive. He looks like a really, really fun captain play. So on the Vikings side of things, I think Hockenson, Aaron Jones, and Addison look awesome. I would rank them Hockenson, Addison, Jones. But I would definitely look to go overweight on those guys if I'm entering a lot of tournaments. If I'm only entering one tournament, I think Hockenson is the most interesting one because he's the cheapest. He offers that PPR value, and if he gets a touchdown in this game with his role, I think he's going to crush and be a massive, massive play in the captain spot. So we can also get different on the other side with a really big name guy that is going to fly way under the radar, and that is going to be Cooper Kupp. No doubt about it, Cooper Kupp has been super disappointing. You can't sugarcoat that at all. In his last 3 games, he's had under 10 fantasy points combined. Everybody remembers that week 15 game against the 49ers. We had no catches, the big 0-point fantasy outing. He has not been any better since. I don't think he's really been needed that much, and he certainly hasn't been targeted. He has not had more than 3 targets in any of his last 3 games. But a couple things. Number one, Puka Nacua is kind of a reckless player, and he goes down the field and makes a lot of impressive but dangerous catches. I would not be that shocked if Puka Nacua sustained an injury in this game. I also would not be that shocked if the Vikings went out of their way to take away the deep ball and specifically, isolated the coverage on Puka. Because if they do, then they are forcing the Rams to win with their ground game, which isn't going to happen, or they have to win with Cooper Kupp. So, which, by the way, why can't you? I still think Cooper Kupp is good. I just think he's had a bad stretch here. Back in week 14, he had 20 fantasy points. Back in week 11 and 12, he had 31 and 20. We know he still has a ceiling. The reality is he just has not been getting opportunities. 9 total targets in the last 3 games. You could argue he's washed. You could argue he hasn't been getting open. You could argue the Rams favor Nacua. Maybe all of that's true. But in the win or go home setting, in a really good matchup on paper, and it probably in a game flow situation where the Rams are trailing and have to throw, I think Kupp is a great, great play in the captain. coming in at sub 5% ownership. He's my favorite Rams captain play of the entire slate. Obviously, Puka Nacua is safer. Puka Nacua has a higher ceiling, but Puka Nacua is also 1.8K more expensive, and he's way more owned. So certainly you could captain Kupp and also still play Puka, and probably, I'm assuming if you're doing that, you're going to want to get Stafford as well. But I think I would probably not combine them together in a good portion of my lineups where I'm captaining Kupp, just because if I'm trying to take advantage of, Kupp's ceiling here, it's likely that Nacua is not benefiting from that happening, right? So whether Puka gets completely shut down, whether he gets injured, or whether Kupp just has the better game, I think it's kind of unlikely that they both smash. I certainly would still have a few lineups where they're together if I'm stacking the Rams passing attack. But I just think Cooper Kupp looks really, really interesting here in the captain. And in general, in the flex, I would be overweight as well. I just think he's going to have a good game. I think given the matchup and the necessity and the fact that the Vikings should sell out to stop Puka, he is going way overlooked. Those are the only guys that are really a priority. Also, Matthew Stafford, I mentioned, he can also be thrown in the captain. He does not have a ceiling, though. No rushing ability. And even though Puka and Kupp can be so good, Stafford doesn't really always benefit from that. In his last 3 games, he's had fewer than 10 fantasy points in each one. And dating back to week 8, he's had 2 games over 20 fantasy points. So he has no rushing ability. And his guys are getting a lot of PPR value. So it's not really coming from a ton of touchdowns. So they do throw the ball quite a bit. And those guys should be very productive, but it does not necessarily mean Stafford is going to crush here. So I do not like Stafford in the captain slot that much. I will say he's not very owned. He's not that expensive compared to the other top options. And the matchup does favor the Rams throwing the ball a ton. Whether they're playing from behind or just the matchup by the numbers, it does. So I'm not saying Stafford's incapable of providing a ceiling here, especially if the Rams surprise and win or something. It's always possible. But just on paper, the ceiling is not amazing. As far as fringe punts, you could go to Tyler Higbee because he saves a lot of cash at 4.5K. Certainly a risky play. I mean, he's priced 4.5K for a reason. Let me just find him here. Actually, let's click it here. Tyler Higbee, very cheap. He did pop off in the last game of the year, 15 fantasy points, 7 targets. So that's nice to see. So I think based on the price point and his expanding role, and now he's actually healthy, I think he's a fine try. The matchup is not, I don't think it's bad. Let's see. I think it's probably middle of the road here. Yeah, it's middle of the road. But due to the savings, I don't mind a couple shots on Higbee as the captain, especially if you're with me on the logic of targeting the Rams passing game. There's nothing wrong with that. But in general, I probably would just be a little bit overweight on Higbee in the flex because he's not going to be very expensive there. Like probably one of the better flex plays of the entire slate, to be honest. Cam Akers is involved with Minnesota. He does rotate in. Unknown if that could change in the playoffs. Maybe the Vikings would just ride their top guy and Cam Akers would not be as involved, but he had been involved. So if you want to take advantage of Akers, assuming he's in, because he is questionable for this game with an illness, he has had 6 carries in each of his last 2 games, 8 total touches in each of his last 2 games, and he has been pretty productive. 58-yard rush against the Lions in the last game. So as long as he's in there, I think he's an okay flex play or something. I just don't envision, unless you think Aaron Jones is going to get benched or hurt, I just don't see why we would captain him. Not captaining the kickers, not captaining the defenses. Obviously, it's a showdown and it's a tournament, tournament setting, so you can do whatever you want. I think there's gonna be a lot of points here, but I think the offenses and the skill player guys are gonna be doing so well that captaining the kickers just really lowers your ceiling to the point where that feels like not a good idea. Fringe guys, like the Rams just roll out a lot of other guys behind Kupp and Nacua, so it's really hard to decide which ones to target. Demarcus Robinson is probably the guy to go there. But Jordan Whittington at 4.2K is certainly interesting. And then they have their other guys like Tutu Atwell, and Tyler Johnson, if he's still in there, if he's still going for them. I think he is. Well, he was inactive for the Jets game. He did come back and play against the Seahawks in week 18. So he's 1.5K. If he's active, I don't mind looking at him as a punt. You can also look at the Rams backfield. They just signed Royce Freeman, and there's also Ronnie Rivers. So one of those guys could end up getting a few touches behind Kyren Williams. Not the worst punt in the world, but I don't feel great about it. I think right now in terms of flex plays, Tyler Higbee probably stands out the most as far as true punts. You could maybe go Tyler Johnson at 1K, Colby Parkinson at 1.2K. Jordan Whittington looks okay at 2.8. He was very good in the Week 18 finale, 3 catches for 86 yards. I think he's interesting just because, I mean, I would argue that he did well enough to garner himself a few more snaps in a must-win game. But then you got Minnesota guys too. You got Jalen Naylor at 3.6. He looks like a good flex play. His production is very hit or miss, but he did have 19 fantasy points in Week 17, 8 in Week 18. So he's involved enough that we can consider him in the flex. Certainly you could try him in the captain. I just don't think the volume is there to really feel amazing about it. All right, so let's just go over and check the ownership in the flex. That does it for captain, needless to say. But is there anybody else down here that we could maybe go overweight on? Certainly you could play the kickers or defenses in the flex. I just don't think the defenses are really high upside plays on this slate. And I think the kickers are okay. So the kickers are actually carrying a little bit of ownership. I'd probably just be right around the field with the kickers. I think they're fine. They get enough opportunity, and their offense has put up enough points that's fine. But I don't feel especially great about either of them. I'd rather just load up on offensive players if I can. But certainly in the flex, 4.85K. I mean, that's pretty good for guys who have a decent chance to get 10 fantasy points or more here. Brandon Powell at $200. He could get nothing, or he could come in there and do something, or do something on special teams as well. You know, you could look at Rams backup tight end like Johnny Munt or something too. These guys are all like definitely just a shot in the dark, no doubt about it. Josh Oliver is probably a little bit more stable than a Powell or Munt play at 1.6K. He's not going to garner any ownership really still. But honestly, if I can help it, I'm really trying to look at maybe Naylor at 3.6. Perhaps the kickers in the flex, but really Tyler Higbee is the first flex guy that stands out to me. All right, so that is going to do it for me. Obviously, I'm going to go a little bit more contrarian at captain, and that is like the best way, in my opinion, to get different on this slate. I still want to get a lot of Justin Jefferson and Puka Nacua if I can. And in general, no matter what I do at captain, I think going underweight on Kyren Williams will get me different from a lot of the lineups out there. And then if I'm going to prioritize my captain options, I like Hawkinson, Addison, Kupp, and then Aaron Jones. Those are the guys I want to get overexposed on compared to the field, because I think one of those guys is bound to break the slate. All right, hopefully this helps you out. If it does, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and also come join our Discord so we can help you win tonight. All right, thanks for watching, and good luck.